My mother-in-law served steaks and desserts to my husband's family, everyone except me. But then, I only ordered for family. My mother-in-law smiled when my cousin asked why I got no ribeye or chocolate cake. Am I family or not? I asked my husband. Don't do this. Not here, he muttered, still chewing. But the table fell silent when I said what no one expected. My name is Melissa, and I've been married to Connor for 7 years. We met at a coffee shop book club in downtown Portland on a rainy Thursday evening. At the time, I was already working full-time as a financial clerk at Northwest Grocery Solutions, one of Oregon's largest supermarket chains. Connor was finishing his master's degree in urban planning at Portland State. He used to look at me with genuine admiration and say things like, "You're amazing, Mel. Working full-time while I'm buried in textbooks makes me feel like a slacker." I'd smile and think it meant something deeper than it probably did. When Connor landed his first job as a city planning assistant with the Portland Development Commission, we moved into a cozy 2-bedroom apartment in southeast Portland. That's when I first met his parents, Dorothy and Richard Blackwell. She wore Estee Lauder perfume like armor and judgment like a crown. He shook my hand like he expected a business card in return. Connor's older sister Brooke, 29 to Connor's 27, had never held a paying job in her life and wore that fact like a badge of honor. Dorothy's first words to me after a long calculating stare were, "Oh, I pictured someone taller." Richard followed with, "So Melissa, you didn't attend college, did you?" The emphasis on didn't dripped with condescension. I didn't flinch. I'd had bills to pay at 18 and made my choices I never regretted until they made me constantly justify my existence to people who'd never worried about rent money. For the first couple years, Connor defended me. He'd say, "She works harder than anyone I know. Don't mind my parents, they can be intense, but don't take it personally." I tried not to. I smiled politely when Dorothy brought expensive pastries exclusively for Connor. I didn't comment when she wrinkled her nose at the Folgers coffee I served. But slowly, the slights multiplied like weeds, and Connor's defenses withered. "She doesn't even have a 401k, I once overheard Richard whisper after somehow getting his hands on my pay stub. "I don't know how you manage," Brooke would coo with fake sympathy. I could never do that kind of manual work. Sometimes I'd catch Dorothy rifling through my drawers under the pretense of looking for paper towels. Once she found my budget notebook and shook her head disapprovingly. "So little in savings, no investment portfolio," she murmured to Connor later. "You should have chosen someone with financial ambition." Still, I kept trying. Every holiday, birthday, and uncomfortable dinner, I showed up with a smile. By our 4th year of marriage, the pattern was crystal clear. Every Christmas, I received generic drugstore gifts while everyone else got thoughtfully chosen presents with handwritten cards. No one noticed, not even Connor. When I pointed it out once, he shrugged and said, "Mom's not great with gifts. Don't read into it." But it wasn't just gifts. During family gatherings, I became the unofficial help. I'd arrive to find Dorothy had prepared an unspoken list of tasks, dishes to wash, appetizers to arrange, drinks to refill. Meanwhile, Connor would settle into the living room with his father and sister, discussing politics or Brooke's latest art project. She painted watercolors that never sold but somehow required constant financial support from her parents. "Melissa's so helpful," Dorothy would announce to visitors, making it sound like community service. "She's always eager to pitch in." The subtext was clear: this is her role, her value, her place in this family hierarchy. The breaking point should have been the Thanksgiving when they planned their annual ski trip to Mount Hood. Dorothy mentioned it casually while I was loading their dishwasher. "Family ski weekend in December," she said. "You should pack warm clothes for Connor." When I asked about details, she waved dismissively. "Oh, just immediate family this year. Connor will fill you in." Except Connor never did. I only learned about it when I overheard him on the phone with Brooke, discussing lodge reservations and lift tickets. When I confronted him, he looked genuinely confused. "I thought you knew it was just parents and siblings," he said. "Mom said she mentioned it. She said to pack for you, not us." Connor's face shifted uncomfortably. "Look, it's their tradition. They've done this since Brooke and I were kids. I'm your wife." "Yeah, but..." He trailed off, unable or unwilling to finish the thought. "But I heard it anyway, but you're not really family." That weekend, While Connor posted Instagram photos of pristine slopes and cozy lodge dinners, I sat in our apartment eating leftover Chinese takeout and wondering when I'd become a stranger in my own marriage. When he returned, tanned and relaxed, he brought me a keychain shaped like a ski boot. "Got you a little something," he said, like that made up for 3 days of exclusion. I should have left then. Instead, I convinced myself it was growing pains, that families take time to adjust. I threw myself deeper into work, earning promotion after promotion at Northwest Grocery Solutions. I managed budgets, supervised staff, streamlined operations. My boss, Janet Rodriguez, became something of a mentor. "You've got natural leadership instincts, Melissa," she'd say. "Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." If only Connor's family saw what Janet saw. The real turning point came during Connor's 6th year at the Planning Commission. I'd noticed changes in his routine, sleeping later, seeming anxious about phone calls, spending more time on his laptop with a frustrated expression. When I asked about work, he'd give vague answers about budget cuts and departmental restructuring. Then one Tuesday evening, he came home pale and shaking. I was making dinner, spaghetti carbonara, his favorite, when he slumped into a kitchen chair and buried his face in his hands. "They let me go," he whispered. My heart dropped. What happened? The story came out in fragments. Connor had been responsible for reviewing property tax assessments for a major downtown development project. Somehow, he'd miscalculated the figures, approving assessments that were off by nearly $2 million. The error wasn't caught until after official notices went out to dozens of property owners, creating a bureaucratic nightmare that made local headlines. "It was an honest mistake," Connor kept repeating. "The spreadsheet had a formula error. Anyone could have missed it. Except someone in his position shouldn't have missed it." That was the point of his role, to catch exactly these kinds of errors before they became public disasters. "What do we do now?" I asked, already mentally calculating our expenses against my single income. "I'll find something else," Connor said. "This market is tough, but I've got experience." What he didn't mention, what I wouldn't discover until months later, was that his termination had been far from quiet. Word traveled quickly in Portland's tight-knit planning community. His former boss had marked his file not eligible for rehire, and informal networks carried whispers about the Blackwell mess. Getting another government position would be nearly impossible. But Connor kept up appearances. Every morning, he'd shower, dress in business casual, and leave the apartment with his laptop bag. I assumed he was networking, interviewing, following leads. I picked up extra responsibilities at work to cover our expenses, telling myself it was temporary. Dorothy and Richard never asked about Connor's job search. In their minds, Connor was simply between opportunities, the kind of calculated career move that successful people make. They continued treating me like the help while praising their son's strategic thinking and selective approach to new positions. The irony was suffocating. August arrived with unusual heat for Portland, and with it came the annual Blackwell family reunion. This year, Dorothy's siblings were flying in from Sacramento and Phoenix, making it the largest gathering in years. Dorothy called me 3 nights before the event. "You'll need to help with preparations," she announced without preamble. "We're expecting 15 people, and I want everything perfect." My manager at Northwest had just announced a rare 3-day weekend for all staff, a wellness initiative that was being piloted company-wide. I could have gone hiking, visited friends, or simply enjoyed some quiet time at home. Instead, I found myself committed to Dorothy's service once again. The preparation began at dawn. While Connor slept until 9, I was at the Blackwell house chopping vegetables, polishing silverware, and vacuuming rooms that looked already spotless. Dorothy supervised with the intensity of a drill sergeant, pointing out water spots on glasses and uneven napkin folds. Richard read the newspaper on their back deck, occasionally calling out requests for fresh coffee. "Don't forget the gluten-free option for Cousin Patricia," Brooke announced when she finally appeared at noon, perfectly made up and wearing a sundress that probably cost more than my monthly car payment. Then she vanished to get her nails done. By the time guests began arriving at 2 o'clock, I was exhausted. My shoulders ached from reaching into high cabinets, my feet throbbed from standing on their hard kitchen floors, and I hadn't even had lunch. Connor helped minimally, claiming he needed to network with the family, as if his unemployed status was somehow a professional opportunity. I forced smiles, hugged relatives I barely knew, and kept glasses filled with Dorothy's expensive wine. When someone complimented the appetizers, Dorothy accepted graciously without mentioning who'd actually prepared them. When Uncle Paul asked about my work, Dorothy interrupted to redirect conversation toward Brooke's latest art show. Finally, mercifully, everyone gathered around their massive dining room table. I had just settled into my chair, the one closest to the kitchen naturally, when Dorothy stood with theatrical flair. "Before we begin," she announced, "I have a special surprise. Just for family." She disappeared into the kitchen and returned carrying a silver platter. On it lay 6 perfect ribeye steaks, cooked medium rare and glistening with herb butter. She distributed them ceremoniously to Richard, Connor, Brooke, Uncle Paul, Aunt Susan, and Cousin Patricia. Each plate came with roasted asparagus and garlic mashed potatoes that I'd helped prepare hours earlier. And for dessert, Dorothy continued, producing an elegant white bakery box, individual chocolate lava cakes from Lou Bernardine Bakery. Just for family, of course. The emphasis on family hit like a physical blow. There was no 7th steak. No 7th dessert. Just my half-eaten chicken breast from the first course, growing cold on my plate while everyone around me enjoyed their special meal. The silence stretched like a taut wire until Cousin Patricia finally spoke. "Dorothy, didn't you order one for Melissa?" Dorothy looked at me with the expression someone might reserve for a stray dog that had wandered onto their property. "I only ordered for family," she said with sickeningly sweet clarity. "Of course." My ears began ringing. My chest felt like it was collapsing inward. I turned to Connor, my husband of 7 years, the man who'd promised to love and honor me. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He cut into his steak with deliberate precision, as if my humiliation was simply background noise. "Connor." Cousin Patricia's voice carried a note of alarm. I spoke before he could deflect. "Tell me, Connor, am I family or not?" Still, he wouldn't look up. He chewed slowly, mechanically, like my question was rhetorical rather than a moment that would define the rest of our marriage. The entire table watched this silent standoff, waiting for him to defend his wife, to acknowledge my place in his life. Instead, he set down his fork with visible annoyance. "Don't do this, Melissa. Not here. Not in front of everyone." "Oh, I think this is exactly the place," I said. My voice sounded calmer than I felt, but my hands were shaking beneath the table. "This is where your family just announced that I don't belong." Dorothy gave a sharp little laugh. "Honestly, this is so beneath you, Melissa. Making a scene over food." "Food," I repeated. "No. This isn't about ribeye or chocolate cake. This is about 7 years of being treated like hired help. Like the outsider you've all decided I am." Richard scoffed. "No one said you weren't welcome here." "You didn't have to say it," I replied. "You said it every time you looked through my bank statements without permission. Every time you made comments about my education. Every time you treated me like I was contaminating your precious family gatherings just by breathing the same air." Brooke snorted dismissively. "You're being so dramatic." I turned to face her directly. "You've never worked a single day in your life. I've been supporting this marriage financially for almost a year while your brother pretends to have a job. So yes, I think I've earned the right to be dramatic." Connor's head snapped up. "Melissa, shut up." "Or what?" I challenged. "You'll lose your perfect image?" Hate to break it to everyone, but Connor hasn't been employed since last October. Every face around the table turned toward him. Dorothy's perfectly composed expression cracked slightly. "What is she talking about?" Connor's mouth opened and closed wordlessly. I leaned forward, my voice gaining strength with every word. He was fired from the Planning Commission after a major error in property assessments. They sent out incorrect tax notices that cost the city nearly $2 million in corrections and legal fees. Connor was supposed to catch errors like that. It was literally his job. That's not how it happened," Connor stammered, but even he sounded unconvinced. "Since then," I continued, "I've paid every single bill. Rent, utilities, groceries, insurance. I've covered everything while he played job search on his laptop and applied for positions he was unqualified for. All while sitting here listening to you people judge my coffee choices." The silence that followed was deafening. Cousin Patricia looked down at her plate, then back at Connor. "Is this true?" Connor stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. This is insane. You're trying to humiliate me in front of my family. No, Connor, I said, reaching into my purse. You did that yourself when you sat there and watched your mother serve everyone except your wife. From my purse, I pulled out a manila folder that I'd been carrying for weeks, unsure if I'd ever have the courage to use it. It made a soft thud when I placed it in front of Connor's empty chair. What's that? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Divorce papers, I said simply. I've already consulted with an attorney. I'm not asking for your permission. The room went completely still. Even Brooke stopped mid-bite of her special dessert. Uncle Paul cleared his throat uncomfortably, while Aunt Susan stared at her hands. Richard finally broke the silence. You're overreacting to one unfortunate evening. Am I? I stood slowly, feeling steadier than I had in months. You think I didn't notice the way you'd sigh whenever I entered a room? The way you'd examine my hands like you were checking for dirt? The way you've spent 7 years making it clear that I'm not good enough for your son? Brooke jumped in, her voice sharp with indignation. You're just angry because you'll never fit in with us. You don't have class, Melissa. I smiled, actually smiled, for the first time all day. And yet, I'm the only person at this table who knows how to pay a mortgage on time. Dorothy shot to her feet, her face flushed with rage. You think this makes you superior? You're a grocery store clerk. Financial operations supervisor, I corrected calmly. At Northwest Grocery Solutions, which just promoted me to regional finance coordinator. And unlike your son, I actually read documents before I sign them. Connor pushed the folder back toward me with shaking hands. You can't do this. I absolutely can. My voice carried a certainty that surprised even me. This isn't about one lunch, Connor. This is about 7 years of watching you choose their approval over my dignity. 7 years of being made to feel grateful for scraps of basic respect. He stared at me like he was seeing a stranger. Maybe he was. Maybe I'd been hiding myself for so long that even I'd forgotten who I really was. I turned to Cousin Patricia, who'd been the only person to question the obvious slight. I'm sorry you had to witness this. She placed her napkin on the table gently. Don't apologize, dear. You've shown more grace than most people would in your situation. Then she looked directly at Dorothy. And you should be ashamed. Humiliating your daughter-in-law in front of the entire family. She's not my daughter-in-law anymore, Dorothy spat. I nodded. And you'll never get another chance to prove otherwise. Connor's voice dropped to barely audible. You really mean it? You're actually leaving me. I didn't answer directly. Instead, I walked calmly to the kitchen, retrieved my purse from the counter where I'd left it hours earlier, and returned to the dining room where 15 people sat in stunned silence. I'll be sending the official paperwork this week, I announced. Connor, you can reach me through my attorney. Dorothy crossed her arms defensively. Don't expect sympathy from anyone. But Cousin Patricia stood up slowly. Actually, Dorothy, I think you'll find that several of us feel differently about this situation. She looked around the table meaningfully. We're tired of the cruelty disguised as tradition. I won't be attending your Christmas party this year. Dorothy blinked in shock. You can't be serious. Dorothy blinked in shock. You can't be serious. Uncle Paul shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Patricia's not wrong, Dorothy. What happened here today? He shook his head. This isn't how we raised you to treat people. I turned toward the front door, but Connor tried one final desperate plea. Melissa, please don't do this. We can work through this. I paused in the doorway without turning around. You had 7 years to treat me like family, Connor. You chose silence instead. The walk to my Honda Civic was the longest and shortest 10 seconds of my life. No shouting, no footsteps behind me, no last-minute apologies, just the sound of my heels on hot concrete and the distant hum of Portland traffic. I didn't cry. I didn't even look back. By the time I reached our apartment, I had already texted my attorney to proceed with filing. The folder had been real, the conversations had been real, I just hadn't expected to use them quite so dramatically. The final straw hadn't been the ribeye steaks. It had been Connor's silence. That week blurred together in a haze of paperwork and iced coffee meetings with my lawyer. I moved into our spare bedroom and kept minimal contact with Connor. He kept trying to minimize what had happened, calling it a fight rather than what it really was, a fracture that had been 7 years in the making. People divorce over affairs, he said one evening. Not over dinner parties. You're being theatrical. But something in his tone suggested he knew better. He stopped his pretend job hunting routine and just sat around the apartment, finally honest about his unemployment. Meanwhile, I stayed busy finalizing my promotion details. Regional finance coordinator meant relocating to Seattle within 3 months, information I saw no reason to share with Connor. 3 days before our mediation hearing, cousin Patricia called me. I wanted you to know, she said, you weren't the only one who saw what really happened that day. Word had spread quickly through the extended family. The relatives who'd sat awkwardly through my confrontation were furious after I left. Several had confronted Dorothy directly, while others simply left early and shared their disgust with family members who hadn't been present. Patricia called it perfectly. My cousin Sarah had told everyone. You don't starve someone and call it hospitality. The social consequences were swift and decisive. Dorothy and Richard found themselves politely uninvited from 2 upcoming weddings. Brooke, who had always bragged about being everyone's favorite guest, suddenly found her phone quiet. Reputation, it turned out, wasn't a permanent shield against consequences. The mediation itself was surprisingly straightforward. Connor wore an ill-fitting suit and couldn't maintain eye contact. I wore navy blue, kept my hair professional, and brought every receipt and bank statement documenting the year I'd supported us both. My attorney barely had to speak. The financial records told the story clearly. At the end of the session, Connor looked like he might finally say something meaningful. Instead he muttered, I can't believe you're doing this to me. No, Connor, I replied, gathering my papers. I can't believe you did this to me. When the divorce was finalized 8 weeks later, I didn't throw a celebration. I went home, ordered Thai takeout, and slept for 12 uninterrupted hours. The silence felt different now, earned, chosen mine. My new apartment in Seattle had floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of Elliott Bay. My colleagues sent welcome plants and gift cards to local restaurants. My new manager said, your references from Portland were outstanding. We're excited to see what you can accomplish here. It was the first time in years that someone had recognized me for who I was, rather than judging me for who I wasn't. One evening in late October, my phone buzzed with an unknown Oregon number. Connor's voice was barely audible. I just wanted to say I miss you. I let the silence stretch before responding. I've been thinking, he continued. Maybe I could drive up to Seattle. Talk face to face. I looked out at the city lights reflecting on the water. No need, I said quietly. Everything I needed to hear, I heard in that dining room. He didn't argue, just let the silence hang between us. Finally, I added, I'm not angry anymore, Connor. I just don't belong to that life, and it doesn't belong to me. So that's it, he said. That's it. After I hung up, I stood in my kitchen for several minutes, just listening. No criticism, no footsteps, no passive-aggressive comments or judgmental sighs. Just me, my apartment, and a basil plant that definitely needed watering. Some words don't need to be spoken to cut you open. And some silences heal everything.